Uranus opposition happens when we're around 42 years old, give or take 1 or 2 years. It's a developmental crisis that's widely recognized in astrology. Maybe not as widely as Saturn return, which I also made a video about. This is a time when the planet Uranus, that's all about freedom and swift change and nonconformism and genius and revolt and originality and independence and future, makes half a circle around the sun and ends up at a point that's opposite to where it has been when we were born, so in opposition to our natal Uranus. Uranus, looks at us and tries to assess whether we are Uranian enough, and if we are, it makes us even more Uranian, and if we're not, it throws a tantrum and either makes us crazy or just very dissatisfied. I am Nadia, the astrologer for people who do not believe in astrology but who don't mind using its language to make sense of life. And today we are tackling the Uranus opposition, the astrological OG midlife crisis that, by the way, my husband is in the midst of and I am approaching, so this is personal for me. To prepare for this video, I sacrificed a few hours of my life to listen to this gem, so you don't have to. Seriously. Do not. I will give you a summary of what it said at the end of the video, and it has a certain charm if you like people who talk about chakras and aliens, which I totally enjoy it, but even for me it was a bit of a torture. Back to planet Earth. What do we actually know about midlife crisis? So, to clean my palate after this Kundalini thing, I consulted the Merriam-Webster dictionary, where the definition of a midlife crisis has a distinct Uranian flavor. It is a period of emotional turmoil in middle age, characterized especially by a strong desire for change. So, change is Uranian, but not every kind of change. As a rule, Uranus is not interested in slow evolution, where change accumulates over long periods of time. It's more of a lightning bolt, sudden kind of change. Let's also take a look at some of the usage of the term. So, the ever-present sports car for people with money is here, as is the burning life to the ground. And also here we have the nervous fits, which is as Uranian as it gets in a negative sense. What does psychology say? Here we have Daniel J. Levinson, who was working in positive adult development, and we want that. We want to feel like we are developing in a positive direction. No, he has authored Theory of the Stage Crisis View, terrible name, but it's stuck. In his theory, he highlighted a stage that he called the midlife transition, that lasts from when we are 40 to when we are 45 years old. So if there's ever been a definition of the Uranus opposition in psychology, this is it, guys. I'm pulling a Wikipedia text about it, and let me read the parts that caught my attention. So let's zoom in. Due to the drastic life changes one undergoes within the middle adulthood transition, blah blah blah. So drastic life changes are here. Then the midlife crisis is a period of development that supposedly happens in middle age and is characterized by making sudden and large changes, very Uranian. Experiencing anxiety, also Uranian thing, and reevaluating oneself and one's choices. I'm going to talk about this, also very much of a Uranus thing. What are the developmental tasks that we have here? Ending the stage of early adulthood, initiating middle adulthood, coping with sources of discord in one's life. I have no idea what they mean by that. Very vague. But there are other developmental tasks. And it is becoming more individualized and constructive, whatever, as opposed to attached to social constraints. This is very Uranian. So here again we see those Uranian topics of breaking free, of swift change, of individuation, and also of anxiety, of nervousness. So how can astrology help us understand this phase and come through it better? For one, it can help us prepare. The opposition comes at a certain fixed age for everyone, but before that you have plenty of opportunities to become more Uranian when Uranus in the skies, couldn't help myself, makes aspects to the planets in your natal chart. It happens every few years, so if you're in your 30s, you're almost guaranteed to experience one or two of those Uranian aspects before the opposition strikes when you're 42. If you are interested in learning about when those Uranian times happen for you personally and what is special about them considering your natal chart and how they affect your natal chart, I'm always happy to give you a personal reading. Here is, but also in the description, the link to what options you have. I always recommend starting with a standard reading. There's also information on how much it costs. To book one, write me at this address. So, I also made a video here about how to make the most out of a hard aspect from Uranus. It's not personalized, but it gives you a good idea of how it may feel like and how to approach it in general. To make it super short, when Uranus is forming a hard aspect to something important in your natal chart, like to your sun, moon, ascendant, Mercury, etc., you get sick of something old, and it's so intense that more often than not you have to drop this old thing and move on. Then of course there are people who drop it like it's hot at the first opportunity, the quitters. They find it super easy and they're very quick to do it. Are they better off for it? Well, they would have been if Uranus was the only planet in the skies, which it is not. There's also Saturn that prizes consistency and effort. There's also Jupiter that asks that we believe in something. So only serving Uranus doesn't get us very far in life. But then there are people who are very bad at quitting, and they tend to accumulate circumstances that are outdated and dull and suffocating. You don't want to be that person either. And what I love about astrology, or using astrological language to talk about our life stories, is that it acknowledges that there are different phases we go through and that sometimes one needs to show consistency and at other times quitting is the right thing to do. So, back to Uranus. When you go through Uranian transits before your early 40s, you are getting a chance and some planetary support to individuate, to break out of the mold, to stop following some antiquated rules, to reinvent your life in a more contemporary and authentic way, to become more Uranian. The idea is that if you succeed at doing that, Uranus will look kindly on you when the opposition comes. Another idea coming from astrology is the sequence in which those stages unfold. So after the first Saturn return, which is pretty much complete when we are 30, we have learned Saturn, which is responsibility, setting priorities, being realistic, knowing one's limits, knowing that to be able to enjoy something reliably, we often need to earn the right to do that. And that's super useful, being able to do things we don't feel like doing because priorities. Problem is, when we ignore not feeling like doing something for too long, we become less sensitive to what we do feel like doing. The priorities we have set sometime in the past are limiting our lives in the present and also our future plans and hopes. This is exactly what the Uranian opposition is trying to correct. Best case scenario is that during your 30s, you have worked and sacrificed something and you have earned the right to now make unorthodox choices. For example, parents have invested a lot of time into making sure their children are relatively well adjusted. And so in the 40s, they can focus less on creating stability for the children and more on creating a more exciting, fulfilling lives for themselves. Spoiler, after that, at around 43-45 years, we all experience the second Saturn opposition, which I will cover at the end of the video. This would be a part about what usually follows after the Uranian midlife crisis. So the third thing that astrology can contribute to our understanding of this life stage is the idea of the opposition itself. So Uranus in our natal chart represents where we are independent or maybe even contrarian, where we hate being told what to do and come up with original ideas. It's where we have unconventional tastes, or it's what we need to feel free and like ourselves. But Uranus in the skies opposes our natal Uranus from the opposing sign and house. So maybe over the past years you have been reliable, obedient, limited, maybe conventional in some areas of your life, and yet kept this one small area where you have allowed yourself to be weird and unruly and unorthodox. Well, that is also a limitation and a pattern which Uranus, the pattern breaker, will try to at least shake up. For example, people who have been going through Uranus opposition in the past few years are people whose natal Uranus is in Scorpio. All else being equal, the terrain where they feel authentic, individualized and true to themselves and not so limited as everywhere else could be their own psychological depths, or the way they experience deep intimacy, or maybe transformational processes, their ability to reinvent themselves psychologically after a crisis. In their case, the Uranus that was hitting them at the opposition was in Taurus, and that was in the sign of the body, the physical as opposed to psychological, and of money and of wealth and of our ability to experience sensual pleasure. So some of those topics may have been the topics of their midlife crisis. Now, the next generation that just started their Uranus opposition journey are people born with Uranus in Sagittarius. Their autonomy hinges on their personal philosophy, on what they believe, on how they understand the world, on how they make sense of everything. This is where they are sovereign. During their Uranus opposition, they will be hit by Uranus in Gemini, the one that is promiscuous, intellectually promiscuous, the one that prizes the ability to have a productive dialogue, to actually listen to what the others are saying, to spot trends, to be very perceptive and maybe also duplicitous, more rhetorical than philosophical, more spontaneously entertaining than wise and knowing, more of a blogger than a university professor. So if you were born with Uranus in Sagittarius, your Uranian expansion may loosen you up with more Gemini tools. So how does it look like? Let me give you a couple of examples. Some people do feel the desire for radical change. They feel acutely that the path they have been following is becoming more and more narrow and boring, and they break free. Or try to. It can be destructive if they only burn bridges but don't build anything new. Or it can be creative when they stop limiting themselves and dive into something new, something that previously they thought was not for them. Someone who is more of a creative can go into finances. Someone who's been working on an international corporate career may buy a house in the countryside and get into some local arts and crafts thing. Writers can become singers. Rebels can start families. Political U-turns are also not unheard of. And of course, this vegan to paleo, paleo to vegan journey. One can also just try more different things. Take my husband, for example. He has an amazing job, but he also came up with an idea for a computer game. And now that the computer game project is waiting for whether it gets funding or not, he also started working on a novel about a computer game. He's also a passionate cook and is now all the time creating something that is both tasty and healthy. And He's in therapy because he wants to overcome some limitations that, well, limit him in some aspects. Which is also very much Uranus opposition, not just for him, but for many other people as well. Things they previously perceived as, this is who I am, this is how I am, they start questioning. Do I have to be like this? Is this actually serving me, or am I just stuck? On my own experience with the Uranus opposition, I will report when I get safely to the other side. But hey, another option is for a person who has been living in service of others to be fired from that position. The classic example would be the stay-at-home mother of 15 years who saw herself getting old in this role and whose husband suddenly leaves her and whose children are also about to leave home for their own young adult lives. That's very disappointing, to say the least, but it's a push towards developing some selfhood that is independent of others. This is basically what Uranus demands of us. What is next? Well, like I said earlier, Uranus opposition is followed almost immediately by the second Saturn opposition that starts at around 43, 44 years of age. And that can come in different forms. One fun one is that if during the Uranus opposition the person was excessively destructive, leaving their job, their family, their whatever they had that was stable, but without much of an experience of living and functioning independently, Saturn arrives as the planet of harsh consequences. And we all know the trope. A middle-aged person destroys all around them and is then bitterly disappointed by the outcome. Not surprising. This is why we need to develop our Uranian powers of independent selfhood and individuation long before the opposition comes, to not end up like this. Same goes for the unlucky stay-at-home mother who will now have to work twice as hard as others to keep afloat financially but also psychologically. Another not amazing scenario would be to get into such a tense, stressed state during the Uranus opposition that the body will react with some stress-related illness once Saturn opposition is active. Saturn is the planet of limitations and bodies have them, and Saturn can make us aware of that, maybe painfully aware. But there are good options as well. For example, if the Uranian opposition inspires you to branch out and start something new and exciting, you will then have to actually do it. And since it's a new thing for you, it will take you quite some time and a lot of effort to learn how to do it well. You will also probably be humbled more than once, which is not your cue to quit, more like another test. So Saturn opposition may also come as a realization that you're not getting younger, and that if you still want to achieve anything significant during this lifetime, now is probably the time to really start working on it. Saturn is the planet of time and age, you see. It makes us sensitive to time constraints, to aging, and to our inevitable demise. It also allows us to use our age, our experience, our hard-earned reputation and authority to make things happen that a less experienced person wouldn't be able to make happen. So to use the benefits of how old and how beaten up by life we are. Basically, it is a time when a lot of very capable people start being just as capable, but in ways that are more authentic, more interesting, and more future-oriented. And now to the bonus content, the Kundalini Rising book and its take on the Uranus opposition. So the old school new age take that, come on, aren't you interested what your Kundalini is doing? In this storyline, the Uranus opposition jolts the Kundalini energy up the spine, forcing repressed material to surface. And on its way up, this Kundalini energy is passing through the chakras, of which there are 7, 3 lower ones that are more about being connected to the earth, and then the central heart chakra, and then the 3 upper ones that are more about the spirit. And while rising up like this, it meets resistance in the chakras that are blocked. When this happens, people experience symptoms, and this is where you're supposed to work on that repressed material. Like remember your past life and traumas, go into therapy where they dissect your early childhood, not sure what else. So I love the idea of chakras. The torso is so mysterious inside. There's something important there, and it's so hard to visualize. So an arm, that's plain, clearly nothing mysterious is hiding in there, but there inside it's so easy to imagine those nodes of energy, and it's also kind of fun to meditate on them while imagining them. That's my idea of fun anyway. So the basic recommendation of the Kundalini book is to not try to raise your Kundalini before you're 40. They even have some recommendations on how to slow it down if yours is very impatient. And to then do some chakra unblocking work, which is, the way I understood it, partly physical, partly psychological, partly very spiritual. And I am not a spiritual person, so it's really hard for me to be properly impressed by that. But the author claims that while the Saturn return, the first one, around 29, is a moment to ground yourself and claim responsibility, the positive result of the Uranus opposition is unbridled and very impressive spiritual growth, which, again, what that is exactly keeps escaping me. But who knows, maybe in a couple of years I will be singing a different song. With Uranus, it always pays to expect the unexpected and then be surprised by something completely else that you didn't even know was a possibility. So I hope you had fun. Again, if you want a private reading, there is a link in the video description for that. And see you in my next videos.